And it's recording. All right. Okay, so let's get started. So I have to warn everybody that Barry and I have been really good friends for a very long time. So this conversation might be a little bit different than what people are used from the podcast. And I also want to stress that we have not been drinking yet. So it's not to that point. It might get there eventually, but it's not there yet. Anyway, welcome, Barry.
Can't go wrong. Great to be talking to you again. And, I hope it'll all go well, at least in societies that have very strong adherence to free speech.
Okay, getting into the swing of things. Yeah, it's not like anything really has been happening for the last, let's say, 5 months or something.
No, it's very dull, slow time in human history.
Boring, and especially you as a novelist writing very often about, current affairs and weaving, actual events, real world events into your novels. You must be so bored out of your mind.
The government really could give me a little more material. It's just nothing ever changes. It's totally same. Yeah, it's getting dull. No, that's one of the great things about writing political thrillers. Like I like to say, I get all my ideas straight from the U.S. government. Although with a big assist these days from various European governments, they're doing.
We try, dude. I mean, we really try.
Come at me, bro.
Yeah, I'll see if I can add that. This is an old joke, a running joke between Barry and I. I don't remember when the last year World Soccer tournament was that Belgium played the United States, and some guy made this meme where you see like the map of the world with just the United States and then Belgium, and we're like tiny in comparison. And then Belgium says, "Come at me, bro." It's the best ever. But anyway.
And it really tracks because anytime it's nice that we get to try to one up each other. It's like, do you have any idea what my government did? And I'm like, no. We got you. I will see that. And I'll raise you. Hold my beer. Whatever. Yeah, I mean, like there's an old saying, be grateful you're not getting all the government you're paying for. And wow, if that's not true in Belgium and the U.S., then it isn't true anywhere.
That's true. So we're mainly going to talk about your new book. And we'll do a Q&A part for the second part on Patreon, because my patrons knew you were coming and they had a lot of questions. I'm just going to read the blurb on the Amazon page. So Valeria Velez has just pulled off a stunning upset in California's 27th district, ousting 10-term corporatist incumbent Phillian Dunn from his seat in Congress. Young, beautiful, and idealistic Valeria and her boyfriend, campaign manager Preston Janti, is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah.
Okay. Are determined to use Valeria's new position to stop stuffing the maw of the military machine, which I like as an expression, and return power to the people. But when fugitive hacker Lance Thaddeus, is how I would say that, uncovers a top-secret Pentagon program combining artificial intelligence with nuclear command and control, Valeria might have to choose between her ideals and her life. That's the intro. So we kind of framed our conversation of today that we would talk a little bit about how power works in I would say, in relation to your novel, it would be in the U.S. government, but it applies across the world. I mean, this is universal. So the real nature of how the powers that be govern our lives, what it's to be inside that system also.
Yes. And government, of course, is just one part of a larger system that has to do with, in America, and this is true, this is reflected in the book, sure, you've got the government, but then there's also Wall Street, Silicon Valley, the media, obviously the Pentagon and the whole military-industrial complex. So there's a lot of overlap with government. There's a lot of incestuous insider dealing between government and these private factions, but power itself is acquired by and exercised on behalf of far more than just one traditional organ of power. It's more diffuse and ultimately a lot more insidious than just the government.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe a big part of the discussion, especially these last few years. This has come up a lot where people talk about, call it the deep state, the blob, call it whatever you want. Any society and any government has structures.
Yeah.
That's just whether they are antiquated and in a hierarchy that was maybe established, centuries ago, and it's still basically ongoing in that direction, whether it's something brand new, whether it's something that came about in an organic fashion, just people gathering, and eventually you've got a city of 1 million people and a city state over the centuries. There's going to be a structure. I forget which one it is, but there's like the law of this or the iron law of something. I forget what it's called. There's several, but one of them is that every organization ends up, whatever the goal is, ends up eventually just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, supposedly in pursuit of whatever goal that they are founded for.
Yes.
But actually, it is just protecting themselves and getting more power, drawing more power to themselves.
Yes, and there are a few related laws of those internet laws that the book is 63 chapters, and each chapter is introduced with an epigraph that I like, that I picked up from somewhere or another. And so there's Pornell's Iron Law of Institutions, which is that over time, this is the one you're referring to, Wim, that over time, institutions get taken over by people who are dedicated not to the ostensible original objectives of the institution, but rather to the maintenance of the institution itself. And if you believe that there's something to this law, try applying it with institutions that have been around for a long time. And for me, the preeminent example of such an institution, even though I know this is apostasy in America and among the American blob, deep state, powers that be, whatever you want to call it, administrative state, and true also for Western European governments right now as well, NATO. And it's interesting, gauge your reaction as I say those words. What does NATO do? Why do we still have NATO? Is NATO obsolete? If you find yourself getting emotional about this, like what? Almost like I've committed some sort of religious heresy or apostasy. Know this. There are a lot of people who don't know this. NATO was formed, I forget the exact year, I think it was 1949, it might have been 53. Afterward came the Warsaw Pact. So we know what this was. It was this big Cold War confrontation. And NATO's at least ostensible purpose, 60 plus years ago, at the time of its formation, was to blunt a Soviet armored thrust through the Fulda Gap into Western Europe. And we needed an organization to stop that, because supposedly the Soviet Union would have been unstoppable if it hadn't been for a military organization to stop it. But okay, maybe yes, maybe no. The Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact both dissolved circa 1990, and it's not just that the Soviet Union went away, and it's not just that the Warsaw Pact went away. It's much worse than this. They actually joined the other team. NATO was about 15 countries at the end of the Cold War. I've lost track now. I think it's 34 now or 36 with Finland and Sweden. Who knows? It's more than doubled in size because the other team didn't just go away. It joined NATO. So riddle me this. Why do we still have NATO? Its purpose was to stop the Soviet Union and then the Soviet Union plus the Warsaw Pact. There's no such thing as the Soviet Union anymore. There's no such thing as the Warsaw Pact. What is NATO for? But if it's true that the ongoing purpose of institutions over generations of leadership is to preserve the institution, to find new missions. And it makes perfect sense that NATO is still around, and NATO will be around finding new missions for until the people who run and profit from NATO's existence are somehow displaced and sanity takes hold again. I don't mean to get too particular about my personal views on NATO, but at a minimum, it's worth asking, why is this thing still here? But if you ask that question among overeducated, in-the-know, establishmentarian Americans, they'll look at you like, as though you're questioning some sort of religious writ, which in a weird way, you almost are. And the very fact that this question is not raised in establishment circles is interesting, given that a Martian newly arrived on Earth would say, I don't get it. Mission accomplished, Cold War over, etc. You didn't just win, the other team joined you. Who are you against now? It's not an easy question to answer. But here we are. And one last thing about this, and I just mentioned it, it's interesting. One of the things that's depicted in the system is, it's my most political book yet, but it is not partisan. There's not even a mention of words like Democrat and conservative in it, except in some of the epigraphs, but it's not part of the story. I never identify who's in what party. It doesn't even interest me, in fact. And this is in part because I think the notion that America has two political parties is extremely misleading. I think you get a much more accurate and useful view of how power is exercised in America by viewing the alleged two parties as two wings of a single party that agree on almost everything that's consequential and have a few minor disagreements. So if you did a Venn diagram of what the Republican wing and the Democratic wing agree on, there'd be almost total overlap, but just a little bit of disagreement at the margins. NATO is one of those issues. It's inconceivable that an American politician from either wing of the party would stand up and say, I think it's time to disband NATO. There are a couple of edge cases who aren't even in Congress anymore, maybe Justin Amash or Ron Paul. Short of that, I couldn't tell you. There's just nobody serving in Congress right now who, to my knowledge, has said, like, why are we spending all this money on NATO? It's very strange. Sorry for my long rant.
No, it's okay. This is an issue that we've been facing for years now. You and I have talked a lot about, how wokeness and postmodernism, kind of change the way people think. One of the issues is that people are unable to think coherently and make a coherent argument and not fall for all the, logical fallacies and so on. That's one aspect. Another aspect, just like you said, is that people have no sense of history. They don't remember why things, or they don't know how did it start, what was the purpose, how was that purpose diverted. You can have a discussion whether diverting the purpose was a good thing or a bad thing.
Absolutely.
But you do have to agree that it got changed. Just like Europe, the foundation of the European Union was a peace project.
Yeah.
We are now rearming to the tune of about, 800 billion euros, which we don't have, which is not going to happen anyway, because we don't have the money and we're broke, and Germany is broke, and Belgium for sure. Anyway, let's not go there. But when you say that, and I told that to people, so like, look up, like right now, you can, if it's still there, I looked it up last month. So maybe it's gone by now, but if you look at the website of the EU, it will say about us, the history. It's a freaking peace project. That's the whole goal, so that there's no more war. And now they're like, war. Okay.
And you know how you solve that problem? With things like war is peace. Because a lot of Western European leaders have come right up to the edge. I think they'd say it themselves. They'd actually be saying war is peace, but they maybe know 1984, and they're like, oh, that's like a little too obvious. People will react. They've heard that in an Orwellian context. So they say things like that, like the way to peace in Ukraine is, we want peace in Ukraine, so we're going to have to keep arming Ukraine. And you got to think about that a little bit. Like, you're going to make peace not by talking, not by discussing your differences or anything like that, but just by endless war. Whatever, get me started. But, okay, let's talk about this. Actually, you mentioned postmodernism. People don't know enough of history, or they're not able to apply it. The absence of any kind of critical thinking, it's really dangerous. So, for example, it's been my observation among the humans. I like to call them the humans because it gives me a little distance. I've got a character in the new book who does that too. And one of the things I've noticed among the humans is that when a human favors a policy, that policy gets positioned as all benefit and no cost. And the unfavored policy, the other guy's policy, that's all cost and no benefit. And I try to get people to look at things as having both costs and benefits. Like you've said, when there's no solutions, only trade-offs. I think that might actually be somewhere.
That's Thomas Sowell.
Okay, Thomas Sowell. I knew that. And so if we could just discuss, like, okay, that's an interesting policy. I see what you're going for. Have you considered these costs and risks? And likewise, my policy, I see benefits, there may be costs and risks. One of the things that I find most astonishing about Western power centers' attitudes toward Russia's invasion of Ukraine is what are the risks we're running in expanding NATO all the way to Russia's most sensitive borders, and arming to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars belligerents in Ukraine, including various Nazi groups. They were known as Nazi groups before the invasion, and then they got rehabilitated afterwards, as we know. That's just the way it works. We've always been at war with East Asia back to 1984. But I'll sometimes say to people, are you concerned? Are there any downsides? Are there any risks? People don't see it. I'm like, what if the war starts going badly for Russia? Do you think Russia might escalate? The war's been going badly for NATO. That's why NATO's been escalating for the last 3+ years. What if it starts going badly for Russia at some point and Russia escalates? Have you thought about what that might entail? Are you at all concerned that this thing might go nuclear? And people are like, no, they'll never do it. And my response to that is that because the humans are always rational and that scared, angry, upset, sleep-deprived humans always behave like Vulcan binary computers and always make logical decisions unaffected by emotion or ego or tribalism or anything? Has that been your experience with the humans? And it's like I'm speaking a foreign language. And then they're like, look, I'm not saying it's impossible, but no, come on, it's never going to happen. Putin doesn't want a nuclear war, except in the next breath, he's the new Hitler and he's crazy, but whatever. And then I'm like, okay, what percentage? What do you think is the risk? Is it 5%? 1%? What's the percentage?
Stop making sense. Don't talk like that.
I'm just like, you have to just account for these things. Maybe your policy makes perfect sense, but stop pretending it's cost and risk free. But that's what happens when people get caught up in these things.
One of the big issues, and I think this also, that's my opinion, is that one of the reasons that we get stuff like the Uniparty that can just basically be in agreement in, let's say, 90% of all policies and cases and so on, and only make a big stink about the 10% that they supposedly disagree on, is that as long as you can have citizens act like it's team sports, like that's the good team, that's my team, and the other team sucks, no matter how much they beat you, no matter how badly you get beaten season after season, your game is dead last in the rankings, and you're like, no, we're still the best and they suck. No, they don't. They've been beating you for like 50 years. Don't care, we're the best. As long as people think like that, there's no way that you can reason coherently and you can get to a point where like, okay, this doesn't make sense. I just made a meme when like a few days ago. The classic meme of the two buttons and like the cartoon character, like, oh, I have to choose between two buttons.
Yeah. I saw this on your Facebook, which is about Belgium and with regard to Ukraine. Yeah.
Well, so the big thing now is Russia has put forward certain demands that need to be met before they can start negotiating a peace treaty, and one of them is like a neutral Ukraine. Everybody's up in arms. And so I said, okay, one button is, why would Ukraine have to be the neutral buffer state? The Ukrainian people are free to make their own choices, which I agree with. The other button is, Belgium is a historical aberration and needs to be dissolved. Now, this is a big thing in Belgium, the dissolution of Belgium. Do we stay united or not? This has been going on ever since we were created, well over a century ago.
Because you got the Dutch-speaking portions and the Flemish.
We got a French, and so Dutch-speaking, French-speaking. We got a little bit piece of Germany after the World War as well. It gets very complicated. But the point is that Belgium was never a state. It was created by the powers that be of that time to keep oversimplifying France and Germany from fighting the whole fucking time. Yeah. So let's make a nice little buffer state so that the big power players, like the nuclear powers of that age, would stop fighting.
Yeah.
That's why I have a country. So it needs to go. Because we're supposed to, it's artificial, and we have goddamn right to choose whatever we want to do with our lives and who we want to belong to. Right?
So
freedom.
These are super interesting questions, and to your point, they get obscured by this kind of cheerleading, like tribal mentality of the other side is the evil incarnate and we're only virtuous and good. And we could both bounce around all day talking about this stuff, but I actually think questions like, I don't know much about Chinese history. I'm not going to pretend to, and I'm not approaching this so much from a historical perspective, but more, how do you figure it out? So it is agreed throughout the world, including between China and Taiwan, that China and Taiwan are one country. They've got two competing governments, and each one claims to run all of mainland and island Taiwan, China. They agree that there's only one China, and it's both, which is interesting. De facto, it hasn't worked out that way, but that's the agreement. And there's a concern in various places that at some point Taiwan is going to just say, look, we're independent. And in America, there's a lot of people who are like, they should do that. Taiwan has every right to do that. And I'm like, maybe. I don't, again, I'm not a historian. What do I know? But what if New Jersey decided today that it just had enough? Or, I live in California, and California is like the sixth, depending on what year we're talking about, or the ninth biggest economy in the world. It's got a huge coast, farming, high tech. California would probably do reasonably well as a country compared to many other countries in the world. What if California just said, we're a very blue state and all this nonsense, it's crazy. We've just decided to go our own way. Would the rest of America say, yeah, I guess you could do that? What if the city of San Francisco wanted to do that? Like, what if a neighborhood? What if a city block? Like, how do you figure it out? I don't think these are easy questions. And just these kind of thoughtless bromides about, Taiwan should be able to declare independence and China should just be fine with that. I'd like to see them work it out, whatever gets worked out, without war, without a world war. That would be desirable. But I think it's a little more complicated. Like, if you're willing to say, hey, anybody should be able to leave anywhere. Are you sure about that? Like, what if the people on the other side of the street said they want to set up the independent establishment of Main Street or something? You probably would have some concerns. It's not so easy. Plus, it's kind of funny that a lot of Americans think, hey, if Taiwan wants to be independent, they should just be able to do that. I'm like, I don't know. I was taught about the Civil War in New Jersey, where I grew up. In the North and in the South, they call it the war between the states. And if they're being a little bit funny, I think the war of northern aggression. Like, you had a lot of people, I think it was 13 states, who basically said, look, we want to go our own way. We have our own way, our own culture, whatever it has to do with slavery or other things, whatever. We want an amicable divorce. And the North said, you're not allowed to leave. Like, in another context, that seems kind of crazy, but it's not taught that way. So we're telling Taiwan, yeah, you guys should declare independence. Now, nobody in America, you don't get that right. That doesn't seem coherent to me.
And this is from the meme that I've been sharing for a while now, from the movie The Contender, which is a great movie.
Yeah, you're always, I know. I watched it again recently. It really holds up.
I really like it. It's one of my favorite movies now, and which is basically like, it's not a principle if you only adhere to it when it's useful or when it's good for your side, and you ignore it when it's good for the other side. And that's mainly what's been missing for many years. And it's human nature, obviously. Sure. And that's why I gave the example of people getting all bent out of shape, like, Ukraine shouldn't have to be a buffer state. They can choose whatever they want. I'm like, yes, they can. But then you also have to agree that when you say that, you are saying a buffer state is not a good thing. That's what you're saying.
Not just for you. It's like, you didn't say this is just Ukraine. You said a buffer state.
A buffer state, yeah.
Are there any other buffer states?
So if Ukraine, shouldn't be a buffer state, and the people should have a right to choose whether to become one or not, nobody can force it upon them. I'm right here, dude. I'm right here. I should have that right as well, because my ancestors were forced, into this thing. We didn't have any say in it. It was, France and Germany and the UK, and, they were all talking over our heads, saying what was going to happen. And my ancestors that lived here is like, shut the fuck up. You don't get a say in this. This is now your king. Bow to your master. I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but that's basically what happened. I'm like, okay, so then do the people say that Ukrainian people shouldn't have to do that? Okay, then I don't have to either. So you are now in favor of the dissolution of my country. That's the only principled stance you can take.
If you're being principled, that's right.
And if you're not being principled, then why am I talking to you? Because the only thing you want to have is power. Yeah. You want to say that, listen to me, I'm right, you're wrong. Why? Because I say so, like you're a 3-year-old. Right.
But I don't even want to be that honest with you. I made up an alleged principle that I'm going to apply in an unprincipled way. And it's almost even more disrespectful. Like, just tell me what you're doing. Just tell me you're doing this because you can, and I'll at least feel minimally respected as you're screwing me over. Yeah.
I mean, I've been talking about the war in Ukraine for a long time, and I've been talking to a lot of people. And in the beginning, I was very naive when I talked publicly about it. People getting very upset at me when I was like, "Of course, Russia is the aggressor." Duh. I mean, who the hell is going to doubt that? That's not the issue. I'm not talking about the discussion is not who is the aggressor. It's not a discussion. The discussion is how the hell do we end this as quickly as possible? Yeah, Ukraine shouldn't have to. I agree, they shouldn't have to. So here's an analogy for you, the one that I've been using for years to talk to people when it
I
comes
like
to
this one.
self-defense. You want to cross the road.
Yep.
You are in front of the zebra crossing. The
Yes.
light turns in your favor. You can cross. I mean, you can cross the road. Everybody has to freaking
You
stop.
have the right. It's
You
your
have the right. You
Under
have the
the law.
law. Morally speaking, you are right. And there's an asshole racing, barreling down the street at 100 miles an hour, and
In
you
a
can
truck.
tell that in a truck, and he will not be able to stop. You see that? So what you're saying is that you're then going to say, no, I am going to cross the street because it is my goddamn right to do so. It is the right thing to do. He doesn't have the right to drive, crush me with his truck. Yeah. That's what you're saying. Or are you going to wait to let that motherfucker pass you by because he's an asshole and survive? What you're saying is that no, the Ukrainian people are going to have to be destroyed to protect their rights.
That's right.
Because that's what's happening right now. And that doesn't mean that we're in favor of Russia. Not at all. I've been saying it's like, look, if a big strong dude comes at you and he says, I'm going to punch you in the face, and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it, unless
I'm gonna put this side of the foot on that side of your face. It's for any Billy Jack fans out there. Sorry, go ahead.
unless you take 2 steps back.
Right.
And you're in the middle, and you're on a sidewalk in public space, and you're like, no, I have a right to be here. Okay, and then he punches you in the face. And you get up again, and he's still standing there. It's like, I told you to back up 2 steps, and now I want you to back up 10 steps. Or I'm going to punch you even harder in the face. I'm going to break your arm this time. And you get up. What do? He doesn't have a right to do that. He is completely breaking the law, morally speaking, not justified. You are in your right to just stand there, get close to him again, because it's public space. You can do that. How long until you say like enough?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe
And people
a million
can't.
dead.
They can't get over. Yep, they can't get over that. It's like it's not about it's long beyond right and wrong. We've lost that. That's behind us now. Now it's like, how do you stop the killing? And if you say like, no, my principle is that they shouldn't have to, suffer defeat from the Russians and do whatever they want to get a peace treaty. You're like, okay, the only other option then is that the Russians will keep killing Ukrainians until they decide that it's enough, or until you say like, no, this is too many dead people.
Yeah, that's right. And conscripted Russians too. I mean, the amount of death and suffering that this thing has caused. And I know, I didn't mean to turn the whole thing into a disquisition on Ukraine.
No, we're going to switch back to the.
I'm just going to say this: it's if you look at the most fundamental thing we're talking about, and it relates to critical thinking again, it's the conflation of can and should.
Yeah.
We all know those are different words and they mean different things, and there are countless instances throughout life where we can do things. It's literally countless. There are so many they just go right by us we don't even notice, because we can do all sorts of things, but among all the things we can do, we only do a tiny fraction, because most things that we can do we shouldn't do, and we find that we can live completely fulfilling lives doing only a tiny fraction of the things we can do, because there are things we can do that wouldn't be sensible, so we just avoid them. It frustrates me when people phrase things or frame things only in terms of, well, Ukraine has the right, which is a longer way of just saying they can do this. I'm like, I get that, but should they? We should ask whether they should. And similarly, another word conflation that's been used to promote all this needless bloodshed is conflation of the word provoke with the word justify. So a lot of people will say, like, if you say something like, look, NATO expansion over the course of 30 years provoked Russia in a similar way that the Soviet Union placing nuclear missiles in Cuba provoked the Kennedy administration, or to use just a thought experiment, the way it might provoke the American government if Iranians or Chinese or Russians were doing some kind of military buildup in Mexico or Canada. That means provoke. It doesn't mean that the response was justified, but it was provoked. We understand those are two different concepts and that they relate to can and should. Like, you shouldn't provoke someone, even if you can. Or if you do, you better make sure it was worth it, that there wasn't a much lower cost way of getting what you want in this world without provoking someone who's going to cause conflagration in response. Anyway, it's obvious how we feel about this war. But to me, there's even a more foundational point, which is just, you can disagree with me. Not you, Wim. I mean, like, anybody can disagree with me, and that's fine. But can you just use a useful and accurate framework instead of pretending that anyone who can do something should do that thing? Like, that's just nonsense.
This makes sense. I mean, I can spend all my money buying chocolate and eating it in one day. I would be broke and in a coma probably, but I can. Doesn't mean I should.
I can go, if there's a park in my neighborhood that has gang activity and it's known as dangerous at night, a lot of people have been mugged there, I can walk through that park. I have the right. I can. But I would say, if someone asked me, well, should I? I would say, no. I think you'll find that you can live a perfectly fulfilling life by avoiding that one dangerous path. Just don't go there. It's not worth it. Go someplace else. There are a lot of nice places to go. Anyway. Yeah.
It's kind of this disconnect that a lot of people have with reality and understanding consequences and how reality works. And I've mentioned this before. There's a really crazy Instagram account that I follow, Tourons of Yellowstone. It's a combination of moron and tourist, Tourons. And then they should just one of them, again, a guy standing right next to the river that is just in rapids going downstream, and he's just doing yoga on one leg. And that's like, idiot. I mean, you fall over, you're going to get slammed into the rocks underneath the water and be crippled before you can drown.
Okay.
People walking up to bison, just like you know, that selfie. And you see that bison get up and get angry and chase people. I'm like, you have no idea. People have no idea how nature works, how to deal with animals, how geopolitics works, how war works. Yeah. And I'm like, Russia bombed Kiev. Oh my God! I'm like, it's a freaking war. What did you think that they're gonna throw flowers? Yes, this is what happens. I'm like, why the hell do you think I've been saying for years, like, this needs to end as quickly as possible? Because this is what happens.
This is why we drink, Wim.
All right, back to the book. Let me see. So we gave the intro to the book. We talked about basically the definition of powers that be, that it's more than one thing.
Yes.
So when you look, I mean, the book is in part. I'm not going to give away the plot, obviously, but it's in part about technology, new technology, yep. AI, and so on, that has a big influence on it. And AI, the way, I mean, it has existed for a long time, but just the last few years, we're on this basically explosive arc of growth in AI and robotics. Is just basically going exponential, massive changes on the way, which is a very disruptive event.
But let me just, are you recording, or did you not want to now?
No,
or
we're still recording.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Yeah,
just want to make sure we know.
Yep. So how do the powers that be handle disruptive events? Like an economic crisis, technological revolution, stuff like that. A populist movement could be a bunch of things.
So this has been my observation of the humans, that when something is no longer working, whether because the thing itself has become intrinsically less useful or because external circumstances have changed in such a way that the thing that used to work is no longer working so well, the first reaction among the humans is to do that original thing longer, louder, and harder. And you have infinitely more experience than I do in martial arts and that sort of realm, but for me, this is coming from judo, where I noticed that, like, if somebody's got a money move and you know how to neutralize it, counter it, whatever, the initial reaction, the person will try it with more muscle, like try to do it faster or stronger or whatever it takes. And some people will never get off that. They just think like, well, it doesn't make sense. And if they could only just do it a little harder, it'll work. It's a rare person who can relatively quickly shift to an entirely different set of tactics. And so I am concerned, particularly with regard to my government, that the way America is going to deal with a changing world, changing in terms of the extremely rapid advance of some of the most disruptive technologies I think we've ever seen. We're talking about, again, for example, AI. I'm afraid that the U.S. government is going to do what America is best at, and it's going to do more of it and harder and longer, and that's war. That's just whatever else you think. America's good at war. I'm not saying that with any pride. It's just true, And when we're not getting our way in the world, because the world is becoming more unipolar, rather more multipolar instead of unipolar, because, say, China is more rapidly advancing in terms of key technologies like AI and robotics, America is going to deal with the fact that it's not doing as well in the game and the competition as it has previously by doing what humans do in these situations, which is, well, we just have to do what we're best at, but do it harder. And that tends to be brinksmanship, aggression, and war. So I don't know how other countries are going to deal with a rapidly changing world, but I'm pretty sure I know how America is going to deal with it. And we're already seeing this in terms of increasingly repressive measures, repressive domestic pressures, including arrogation of various suppressions of the free flow of information, weird stuff that not so long ago I would have called un-American, except apparently I'd be wrong. Like if you want to come to the United States, even as a visitor on a visa, we're going to have to see your social media profile to first ensure that you don't have any unwelcome opinions. I mean, if another country were doing this, if China had a rule like that, then Americans, this is what we were talking about before, like, is this a principle? Americans would be like, oh my God, they're so autocratic, they're so totalitarian or whatever. I'm like, did you hear Marco Rubio the other day?
I checked up on that because I was like, oh, okay, that didn't happen last time I came to your neck of the woods. And if again, could be wrong, this was AI
so could I.
to me, that this is only for people who, not people who have a visa waiver program. Like I can come over and it's optional to fill it in on the ESTA. But if you go for a different kind of visa so that you could stay longer and do more like stuff like work, then you have to. I don't know if that's right. Now, it doesn't make it better. It's still...
No, but thank you, because I always like to be accurate about these things. So in this case, how widespread is this going to be? But for whomever it applies, we're going to vet people for their opinions, their political opinions.
Yeah.
One of the things I wonder about my country is, when did we get so fragile? When did we become so afraid of, this is an opinion? And it's funny because I'm sure a lot of the people who are in favor of this kind of vetting would describe the other tribe as snowflakes and they need safe spaces and they're so fragile and that sort of thing. And I'm like, have you taken a look at your own behavior recently? It's like, I would like to think we're Americans. We don't have to be afraid of differing opinions. But apparently I'd be wrong about that. So I think this is another thing that power does more generally. So it's like, what might the American government do in the face of unwelcome global or cultural changes across the world? Well, I'm afraid that we're going to do what we're best at, and that's not going to be good for anyone. But what does power typically do as relative power starts to decline, as power starts to slip away? Repression. At least that's my read. Again, I'm not a historian, but that's my read of what happens when power starts to slip away. If you have what remaining power you have, you want to use to try to shore up your power and continue to expand it. In fact, the very first epigraph in the new book, The System, well, the first one is a George Carlin quote that introduces the whole book. It's a big club and you ain't in it. But chapter 1 is the object of power is power. That's Orwell. I think that's fundamentally true, foundationally true. And so the more, when someone or some institution acquires or is given power, the first thing and the primary thing they're going to try to use that power for is to get more power. And you can see where that's going to lead without a very healthy system of checks and balances and transparency and accountability. I think that right now as power shifts geopolitically, you will see people who are losing relative power, cultures and systems that are losing relative power will try to use what power they have to suppress anything that they see as a threat to their power and their continued arrogation of more power. Love to be wrong. Probably not.
Well, and the reason why I asked is because technology is now really front and center in pretty much any society, in government, powers that be, deep state, whatever you want, because it is getting to the point where we've got basically the next revolution is upon us. So we had, agriculture, industrial revolution, computer revolution, and now we have AI and robotics. I mean, just last weekend there was the first robotics martial arts championship in China, Unitary. You can look. You can look. I'll make a load if I can add a video to the show notes.
Yeah, I've seen some of the videos. It's completely crazy.
It's and they're really small robots, and they can. And they're still operated by humans, if I'm not mistaken. They're punching with gloves and kicking and doing roundhouse kicks and that kind of stuff. Mm. And they fall over, and it's funny and this and that. The thing that you always have to tell people when they look at AI and robotics is like, this is the worst they will get.
That's right.
It's not going to get worse. It's only going to get better. And if you want to watch a fun example of that, and I'll see if I can add it, the evolution of the Atlas robot. By Boston Dynamics. And you can see that when they start, like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, it's just this hunk of metal that's moving, and just year by year it gets better and better and better.
It's doing backflips now.
It's doing backflips, it's dancing, it has, lifelike human movement now. It's just like the funkiest stuff that it can do. And like 2 years ago couldn't do that at all. Same thing with AI. Now you've got AI agents that you can tell, okay, do this, and it goes on the internet for you. You can buy stuff. Right now, you still have to, agree with it, like manually agree a payment. But you can okay, build me this. One of my clients, he had an idea of maybe importing spices from India because he just visited for several weeks. They love the country, and he just asked his AI, make me a professional website to sell spices from India in this country. Boom! 1 minute later, he had everything, and he said, and and he's been working in IT for decades. He's like, I was floored. This would have cost me thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, even today, if I have to ask some company to do that, and here that AI does it, the only thing I need to do is write the texts and change the pictures so that it has the actual pictures of the products.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And all that changes how the governments and politicians and the powers that be can actually wield power, because this kind of technology gives a lot of power to the average citizen.
Yes. Yeah, and you know what? The analog here would probably be, or at least an analog, would be the internet. So one of the great things, certainly one of the great promises of the internet, was that it was going to democratize the flow of ideas and opinions and information, and break the lock that, say, establishment media had exercised over the flow of information, ideas, etc. And instinctively, power recognized that, this isn't good. The plebes are not only starting to talk back to us, they're even ridiculing us. But they're talking amongst themselves too. It's dangerous. It is, in fact, dangerous to power when people can fearlessly express original, creative ideas to each other. When they're getting a bad hand, and they can say to each other, "This really sucks," right? Like, I know they're saying that it's raining, but it's warm and it feels like urine that's splashing down my back. It's bad for the plebes to be out. It's like, I thought it was just me. No, man, I'm pretty sure this is piss. And it's just bad when the plebes can discuss that sort of thing amongst themselves. And so what does power try to do? Got to control that shit. And so we see that's what's been happening. I don't have to tell you, but I'll tell anyone who's listening, I'm really not partisan. Maybe some people say that. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I personally find, I would have to think hard to tell you to come up with a politician I don't find loathsome. There are a few former ones who I like, but nobody who's currently serving that I can think of who I don't find other than, at best, a necessary evil. So I'm not in favor of one side or the other, so please don't think that I'm being one-sided when I say what the Biden administration was trying to do to take control of the internet was extremely insidious. It was terrible. If you think that's your team and you're okay with it, you're not thinking ahead, because what today's administration does, whatever power today's administration arrogates to itself, the next one is going to do that and going to try to extend it further, because that's just what power does. So this is not a partisan enterprise. If you're part of the power structure, then the primary divide is between power and no power, or relative powerful and powerless. In fact, this is one of the things that forms the backdrop of the system. It is my most political book, but it is in no way partisan. The words Democrat and Republican don't even appear in the book, except maybe in an epigraph or two. Someone else is saying it. The parties aren't named. Nobody has a party. These are people who just do what they do. And I'm trying to present what I think is a realistic and accurate picture of how power is actually acquired, expanded, wielded, and for whose benefit. I think if you want to understand, and I think this is true in all societies, and certainly it's true in America right now, if you want to understand how power really works, think divide and rule. Think of a prison where the guards and the prison administration work hard to get the prisoners to think, hey, you're black, you're brown, you're white. You guys have nothing in common. You're each other's enemies. Get all these people to fight against each other and hate each other. It makes it much easier to run the prison for your own benefit. Whereas a Martian visiting the prison would say, I don't understand. The obvious difference to me is you got prisoners and you got guards. The prisoners have much more in common with each other and almost nothing in common with the guards. So power tries to obscure those differences. And I think if you want to understand power in America today, again, it's not Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, left, right. It's much more powerful and powerless, relatively speaking, or like elite and ordinary. I think this is the real divide. And when it comes to using technology, whether it's suppressing new technology or exploiting new technology, I'm expecting governments to follow the pattern I just described. All these things will be done with an eye toward maintaining and expanding power by and for the people who already have it. It's not going to have very much to do with what might benefit ordinary people. That's not what power is about. They pretend that's what they're about, but that's a con. Luckily, we're not propagandized in America, so you don't have to worry about that.
But neither are we in Europe, obviously. Our governments and our media absolutely do not ever give us propaganda. But it reminds me. I mean, DVD at Demeere, divide and rule, is like Julius Caesar 2,000 plus years ago. He would conquer Gaul, my neck of the woods, and slaughter about 1 million people during his wars. And this is what he did. If he couldn't immediately fight a tribe, or he didn't want to for whatever reason, he could, try to hire them to fight the other tribe, or sow dissent between the tribes and get them to fight amongst themselves and so on. And he would rule. He'd eventually rule over you, or you'd be weakened by whatever battle with the other tribe. But then he'd come in and kick your ass. So this is all. This is human history.
Yes.
And all forms of government do it in one way, or government authority, powers that be. It's always going to happen. It's the same thing in larger organizations. It's the same thing. And like you said, it's not partisan. And this is one of the things that I also very much liked about your book. And it reminded me of a TV show that I enjoyed a lot, Madam Secretary.
I've heard good things about it. Haven't seen it. It's a British show, I think?
No, it's an American one.
Okay.
An ex-CIA lady becomes Secretary of State basically by accident, never wanted to do that, and she ends up having to do that. A lot about geopolitics, lots about Washington, so I think you would really enjoy it.
I'm sure.
And I saw some interviews with some of the cast, and they mentioned that, and I think that's the key point for me. One of the reasons why I liked it so much is that they said we never say Democrat or Republican. It's not about that. It's like, how does Washington work? How does geopolitics work? We've got an issue with Iran. Okay, there's an attack. How do we deal with that? There's a crisis there. What's going on? And all the different factors are explained. And this is a key thing. That like we ranted about Ukraine and Russia in the beginning, but that's the key thing. People, they only want to limit things to these are the factors that I agree with, that I think are relevant. I do not want to talk about the other ones, because then I have to admit that they are also relevant. And even if you think less so, not to the same degree, or my factor disqualifies that factor.
Right.
I'm not even talking about that. They don't even want to have that discussion. And for me, that's where it ends, because there's no point in talking anymore, because you do not want to have a good faith conversation with me. You only want to win. And that's what, the powers that be have always done, is make sure that the population fights amongst itself,
Absolutely.
argues amongst itself, so that they can maintain power. And the last point, that there's a meme out there. Actually, it's a cartoon. If you remember, Occupy Wall Street. This is a long time ago.
Sure.
Was basically
yeah.
The globalist movement came up, and that was basically getting not really a revolt of the people, but there was this movement that was growing.
Yeah.
And there's a cartoon where you see like this corporate guy sitting in his office looking at those protesters outside, and it says, "Introduce them to identity politics."
I've seen that. That's
and
exactly
it's true.
right.
If you track the rise of certain words like, what is it, inequality, racism, all that kind of stuff, all the woke, terminology, it spikes and across the world. There's a bunch of statistics that you can find that if you look at, you find it online, where it all starts about at the same time, and not just in the United States.
Yeah.
So that's not a coincidence.
No,
there was
no.
not a sudden awakening, but it did succeed in dividing people across the world into two camps.
Yeah.
You were either woke or you were not, and if you were not, you were bad.
Yes.
And if you were not, you thought like those woke guys are insane. And it led in many cases to horrendous results that we will have to pay for decades to come.
Yes.
Which people
Yes.
still don't get.
Yes. It's depressing. One of the things I try to depict in the book is the way power is extremely cynical and methodical in its choice of words and strategies. And what this makes me think of is everybody thinks that they're a good negotiator. Everybody thinks they're a better than average driver. I mean, whatever. It's just part of the baggage. It's hard to be realistic, I guess. So it's like, I'm going to go buy a new car, but I'm a great negotiator. I'm going to get a great deal. And it's like, hey, man, maybe. I'm not telling you you're not. But how often do you negotiate for something? Anything, even something small. I'm not sure. Okay, because the person you're going to buy that car from, that guy, he went to seminars. He negotiates for cars every day. He practices. He takes this seriously. Like, that's his vocation. He's very serious about this. It's really similar to saying, like, yeah, I think I'm a pretty good fighter, and I think I could beat that guy in mixed martial arts. He's a professional MMA guy. Like, I suppose anything can happen, but are you sure? And people think they understand what's going on, but they're just absorbing news mostly passively while they engage in their lives, like the things that matter. You got to go to work, raising your kids, taking care of your house, whatever daily concerns occupy you. But the people who put out these policies, who package the product that this policy is, they give this tremendous thought. And I depict some of this in the book, and it's fun for me because it's an obsession of mine. Like when the government says it's going to do something, I love thinking about what they're really saying. Like way back during Bush II administration, I think it was Bush II, no, was it Obama who did the surge? I can't remember. I think it was Bush II who did the surge. 20 years in Iraq, it's hard to keep track. But the administration called it a surge, and I started imagining the marketing meetings the administration was having before coming up with the surge. And I thought somebody was like, well, we're going to be sending 30,000 extra troops to Iraq, so, it's an escalation. And someone was like, don't call it an escalation. Escalating sounds bad. Americans are a little tired of the war. It's not going the way we promised with the flowers and the garlands and the welcoming us as liberators and everything. And we finally had to admit that there was an insurgency, even we tried not to call it that. Rumsfeld was calling them dead enders. That doesn't sound too bad. It turns out finally, there was really an insurgency going on. So can't call it an escalation. That sounds like, you escalate. It's going up, and who knows where it might stop. And they tried some different terms, and then those weren't good either. And then someone was like, what about a surge? And everyone's like, oh, surge, like surging like a tide. Because what does a surge do? The ocean comes in powerfully, and it sweeps up on the beach, surges in. It rises a certain amount, and then it recedes. So when we say it's a surge, immediately, implicitly, you'll understand this isn't forever. It's a surge, and it'll recede. And it'll carry all the seaweed and the shells and some detritus with it. And the beach will be clean. I love stuff like this. Keith Alexander, who at the time was head of the NSA, National Security Agency, he said, when the NSA got busted collecting everything, he said, look, we're trying to collect information that's functionally a needle. And to collect the needle, you got to sweep up the hay. That's obviously I think it's the American English expression, looking for a needle in a haystack. It's hard to find a needle in a haystack. So Keith Alexander says, so we got to sweep up all the hay to find that needle. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. There's not necessarily a needle in the hay. It's like if you're looking for a needle, it's hard to find it in hay. It doesn't mean that the needle is in the hay. It just means that if it's in the hay, it's hard to find it because it's a needle and it's in the hay. But saying like, well, we're looking for a needle, we got to sweep up all the hay, that's like saying we're looking for a needle so somebody collect all the bicycles or all the lettuces or something. These things have no connection with needles. It doesn't make any sense. But I was like, but people are familiar with the expression, and there's something appealingly bucolic about it. You almost imagine like a Norman Rockwell painting or Andrew Wyeth, and it's a wheat field or a hay field or something. There's nothing dangerous or objectionable about that. Just sweeping it up, just tidying it up. Who wants all that loose hay lying around? This is very clever stuff. Just one more, and I'm sorry, I'll stop with 3 because otherwise, my brain will go into overdrive on this stuff. It just kind of catches in the filter of my brain. Some years ago, I think it was like 9 years ago, I got invited by the San Francisco chapter of the former intelligence officer, the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, which, by the way, I'm not much of a former intelligence officer. It was 3 years in the CIA and a long time ago. I don't really have anything noteworthy I can point to during my brief time there. But technically, I'm a former intelligence officer, so they invited me to discuss my then new book, which was The God's Eye View. And that was about this mass domestic surveillance program in America, a thriller based on that notion. And Michael Hayden, former NSA chief and CIA chief, was also promoting his book at the time, his memoir, which was called Playing to the Edge. And so I got to address him. We both had our remarks. It wasn't really a debate. It was more like I spoke and then he spoke. But what I pointed out was, respectfully, I said, I really like the title of your new book, and I listened to your interview about it. And what you said is that you called it Playing to the Edge because what you're saying is, I don't make the rules of this game. That's up to Congress. Congress makes the rules, but then I'm playing the game now, and I'll play it as aggressively as the rules allow, all the way to the edge of the field, so much that I get chalk dust on my cleats. And I said, I don't want to misattribute anything to you, but that's what I heard in that interview. Would you say that's correct? That's the title of the book. He said, yeah, that's fair. I said, okay, so this is what disturbs me about the title. Playing to the edge, everybody starts imagining in America it would be a football game, in Europe maybe it would be a European football, a soccer game. But it's a game, and when we imagine that, immediately what we think of, what does a game like this have? It has rules, okay, it has a referee, and it has spectators. And we're supposed to think that the game you're playing is like that game. But it really isn't. Who's the referee? Well, there's something called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, but that's a rubber stamp. It's a court only in name, and that alone is good propaganda. This is not a court in any meaningful sense. It's an executive organization that approves 99.97% of requests from the intelligence apparatus, not intelligence community. That's another bit of propaganda. It's a community. It's like a neighborhood. It's just a friendly place. Apparatus would be too scary. Let's not call it that. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I'm sorry because this stuff just gets in my brain. So that's one of the things I was like, Playing to the Edge. That's a really good title. It's good propaganda. And I notice these things and I think about them obsessively. There's just one more from this morning. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat from New York. He was, I don't even remember what he was prattling on about, but he said Putin is a sworn enemy of America. And I'm a little bit literal. I sometimes get criticized for that, maybe justifiably. But I thought, what does that mean when someone's a sworn enemy? I hear that all the time about Iran's a sworn enemy, Putin's a sworn enemy. I'm like, did he swear an oath? Is there a record of this? Was it on camera? Was there an affidavit? Like, what does it mean to be a sworn? Are you implacable? Is there no way to bridge the difference? Does it mean we have to have a war? What are you saying? People just say this shit. I don't even think Hakeem Jeffries knew what he was talking about. I mean, honestly, I don't think I'm being unduly charitable. I think it was just a moronic, thoughtless thing that came out of his mouth because it sounded good in the moment. I don't even think this was like a committee coming up with good propaganda. But in all instances, I try to think about these things from the standpoint of how are our rulers, how is power trying to manipulate our perceptions,
Yeah.
the narrative framework that we use to understand reality, so that power can get what it wants and we'll give up what we should want. That's going on all the time, and you're up against experts like MMA fighters, expert car salesmen, that sort of thing. And the worst thing you can do is to think, oh, I'm as good as all that, I'll be fine. You won't. It's going to take a little bit of an effort to see through it and to defend yourself.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you mentioned it before, but one of the characters in the book is kind of helping the main character along, who's totally new at all the backdoor politics and all the stuff that's happening in the shadows. Like okay, this is how you phrase something, or this, you say it this way and not that way. And that character is just often just like you said, he's in his head and he thinks very differently. He's not really human in that perception. And he's constantly just, and the people are like, what are you saying? They're like, what do you mean? No, if you say it this way, this is the result you get. But if you want to get the different result, what we want, well, you have to say it this way, because that word evokes something else. And you being a writer, you know the power of words, and you know that. And any journalist knows this as well, that the way you write something is going to bring across a message. You can say the same thing 50,000 different ways, using different words, bringing out completely different concepts and nuances.
Absolutely.
And the message changes 180 degrees from whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. God, don't get me started about this. Here's a quick one. The word detainee is since the Bush II administration, detainee has become just part of the American lexicon. And what is a detainee? What person who's been detained? What do you mean detained? Like when I was in school, when I was a kid, they call it detention. And you'd have to stay after school as a punishment. Not that I ever did anything bad as a boy, but if I heard that there were people who sometimes were made to stay after school, and they called it detention. You have detention on Tuesday, whatever. It doesn't sound that bad. It means they just hold you for a little while and then you get let go. But the people America's calling detainees are actually being imprisoned indefinitely without charge, trial, or conviction. And maybe you think that's a good idea or it's a bad idea. I obviously have my opinions, but that's not what I'm here. That's separate from the point I'm making here. The point I'm making here is like these. You can't call these people detainees without vandalizing the English language. Similarly, and this is clever, Israel has a double-lined 18-foot-high concrete barrier between Israel proper and the occupied territories, and it calls it a fence for English language consumption. That's genius propaganda, because when you envision a fence in America, you're talking like a picket fence. It's like it's got some horses, you don't want them running off or something. A fence is nothing. I'm looking out my backyard right now. That's a fence between it. You could hop over that thing in a heartbeat if you needed to. A wall is like we didn't call it the Berlin fence. That would have been too kind to the Soviets. It was the Berlin Wall. And by the way, this can also be used in a positive way. It's a largely forgotten incident now. But early on in the Bush II administration, before 9/11, which obviously just superseded a lot of other stuff that was going on, there was an incident off the coast of China where an American spy plane ran into a Chinese fighter jet, something like that. It was like a midair thing. And the American plane was forced to land on, it wasn't China proper, it was like Hainan Island or something, but Chinese-controlled territory. And there was a little bit of a standoff at the time between the Chinese and American governments. And I remember then Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State at the time, Colin Powell, talking about the American pilots had been detained, but we're talking to the Chinese government. And I remember thinking, that's a good use of detain. If you're just trying to keep people, like you don't want people's blood to get up and it starts to get out of control and tribal, you could say like China's holding our service personnel prisoner, and suddenly Americans are like, we got to do something about this. He was choosing his nomenclature very carefully to try to keep things calm so this problem could be solved in a reasoned way, and both sides were successful in concluding this largely forgotten incident. So language, I'm not saying that all euphemisms or carefully chosen words are chosen for ill effect. They certainly can be, but they can be chosen for good effect also.
There's this one, and I'm noting it down, so I'll put the video in the show notes. There's a Norwegian professor that I think is really well worth following,
Glenn Deason.
And
Dyson, I don't know how he pronounces it. Glenn, is that who we're talking about?
I'm not Norwegian. I would say decent, but the Norwegians will probably not be happy with that. I'm sorry, guys.
We are saying it only with extreme gratitude and respect. However, we're mispronouncing it. Yeah, he's great.
It's great, and he interviewed the U.S. ambassador to Moscow during the 90s, during the fall of the Soviet Union, who was one of the guys who was there, negotiating all that kind of stuff, and who was in the know, who knew what was being said, what was being promised, and so on. And they talked about a lot of stuff. And one of the things that he said is that how did Reagan, for instance, manage to have the détente between both superpowers? How did they kind of get to that point where there was enough trust and so on? And he once asked his Russian counterpart, and he said, "That's easy. You never said that you beat us. You were always talking about cooperation."
Of course.
And he said, that was, again, if I'm not misremembering, that this was what Reagan insisted on. No, we have to, cooperate on this, cooperate on that,
yes.
And you increase the common ground.
Of course.
But the main thing is that was what convinced the Russians. Like, you didn't call us losers. You didn't say that you won and you beat us, or we whatever. It was like, we're working together, and then we can sell it to our own people, obviously.
Of course, without egos getting engaged. This was Jack Matlock, by the way, who is the ambassador, America's ambassador to the Soviet Union at the time. Very impressive guy. I was a pretty old dude right now, but
yeah, he's in his 90s, but he was coherent.
Yeah, but so totally coherent. I know. I watched that interview too. He's great. And you know who does this now? Even though I know he's the new Hitler and a reincarnation of Peter the Great and all that kind of stuff, Putin. If anyone's curious, I know we're not supposed to listen to our enemies and our adversaries, the sworn enemies of the United States.
And just as a sidebar, because that is explicitly what Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War. If you want to win all your battles, you never ever listen to the enemy, and you never ever try to understand him.
Don't know your enemy. That's
don't
crazy.
Know your enemy. You will always win.
Only losers do that.
I've had that discussion with people 3 years ago. People who would love to, who would quote Sun Tzu, and I would say, like, what do the Russians want? I don't care.
What are you going to do? So, okay, even though I know we're not supposed to do it, if you can secretly score a copy of Oliver Stone's book, The Putin Interviews, you can read the book or listen to it, or he did a video show of it that you can find at any place you can download video. Either way, I listened to the book, and I was struck by the fact that Putin, whenever he talks about the American government, European governments, or NATO, he always calls them partners. It's incredible. He's like, well, our NATO partners, it's like, well, our NATO partners are sending F-16s and gravity bombs and, HIMARS missiles or whatever to Ukraine. And I was like, why are you calling them partners? It's just better. This would be a good use of carefully chosen words. It just affects the way we feel. It's almost like a biofeedback loop. The other side feels respected. The other side's cued by it. It's like, oh, I thought we're enemies, but are we partners on this? We can be. Why not? There are a lot of global problems that can only be solved via cooperation. So if we're cooperating, then in a sense, we're partners. Why don't we emphasize that? What's wrong with that? Anyway, yeah, Jack Matlock, and kudos to Matlock and Reagan. Why not? What does it cost you? Good negotiators, by the way, litigators, negotiators generally, they know to do this. No matter how you feel inside, like, yes, I negotiated the best deal in the world, and you feel like the other side probably feels like it didn't do as well. You go over and you say, man, you really kicked my butt. I'm glad we got it done, but you took me all the way to the limit. You're really good. And even if they know that you're bullshitting a little, the fact that you went out of your way to bullshit a little bit, they feel respected. And then we could just get along better. What's so terrible about that? I don't know.
Obviously, in your writing, in your novels, you've always, tried to cover, geopolitical, political events and incidents, real life incidents, just weaving that into your stories or using them as a starting point. So this is writing, like you said, this is the most political book that you've ever written. It is a political thriller, so it's not really an espionage thriller.
Truth in
so
advertising. Yeah.
So has writing the book changed your perspective on anything when it comes to how power is wielded?
What it's done is it's made me even more sympathetic on a human level to the pressures that anybody who enters politics or any system of power will be subjected to. And I'm not excusing anything that any of our rulers do or what they become, but one of the things that I really like about writing full-time, being a novelist full-time, is you have to have some solid sense of human nature. And sorry, a lot of thoughts are crowding into my brain right now because they all connect. The thing that interests me most in almost everything is the human element, the human nature element. I feel like you can't understand anything about the world unless you understand the humans. And so for me, what's interesting about learning more about other cultures and studying history is that it's almost like a scientific experiment through which you can distill out what's common among humans. And so just as one quick example, I'm sorry, this is too long and discursive an answer to your question, but I'm going to get back to it in 1 second. You'll see how it all relates. I don't think there's ever been a time or a culture where disrespecting people is a good way to get what you want. I don't think so. I mean, if you have overwhelming power, you can do anything you want. But assuming the absence of asymmetrical power, then if you make people feel disrespected one way or another, it's probably not a good way of getting what you want. And it just seems intrinsic to humans that we respond favorably when we feel we're being treated respectfully, and we don't respond well when we feel we're being treated disrespectfully. Now, what constitutes respect? That will vary from culture to culture, and those are things you should learn. But the presence or absence of respect and its effect on humans, that seems to be cross-cultural and across time. And so I just like to be aware of things like that. I think it just interests me inherently, and these are things I try to convey in my novels, like an accurate, deep, nuanced picture of what it means, one way or another, to be human. But recently I came across, I wish I could remember her name because I'd love to give her a plug. It's a gal on Twitter who, her thing is she analyzes systems. And I don't feel like I have a good head for that, but systems are also obviously very important. She talks about things like dollarization or de-dollarization, or what the Trump administration calls like de-risking with China. Yeah. There's a guy who's just wonderful on all elements of geopolitics, but particularly on China, named Arnaud Bertrand. I'm very proud that he had some quite kind words to say about the system, because what a mind on this guy. And he focuses on human nature, but especially he's got a view of systems that, again, I don't feel like I have a really good head for. Systems are important too. So has the book changed my opinions about anything? I wouldn't say it's changed. Like it's not like I was going in a certain direction, and having written the book, the direction has changed. But I feel like it's given me a keener sense of what happens to well-meaning but flawed humans who enter into a system of power full of ideals and thinking and expecting that they're going to find a way to manipulate that system of power to make it good to do good ends. And something happens along the way. It happens to all of them. And I sometimes wonder, why is it that the worst people in the world seem to be overrepresented in politics? I mean, just the most craven, self-interested, power-grubbing, foul people. And it's an interesting question. Do they start like this, or do they become like this? Are they already primed to be this? These are really interesting questions, and I play with a lot of this in the system. So regardless of how I personally do find politicians to be just foul creatures. I'm not talking about at the local level. Good people get into politics at the local level for all sorts of good reasons. It's like, hey, that intersection is dangerous. Like the third guy got hit on a bicycle this year. We need, and I petitioned the city government. They won't put a stop sign in. So by gum, I'm going to do that. God bless. We need more people like that. But by the time you've been weeded out to like the federal level in America, Congress, the Senate, or the governorship, like these sorts of mayor of a big city, by the time you get to that level, your appetite for power is probably something that should be severely distrusted. And it's funny because I remember the late novelist Andrew Vax, who I'm proud to say was a good friend and an extremely wise and insightful person. He used to talk about, he had some experience in conflict, and he would say, if you knew someone who was like, oh, I'll interrogate the prisoner, you'd be like, thank you for disqualifying yourself, And Groucho Marx, this is one of the epigraphs in a book, I would never want to join a club that would have me as a member. Yes, the people who want power the most should probably be denied it the most, and yet we have this self-selecting system. Many of these people, I do think...
That's Lord of the Rings Gandalf, that Frodo wants to give him the ring. He says, no, don't give me the ring because I would do terrible things with it. And basically trying to do good and like we say, the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Always.
This is how it goes.
You and I talk a lot about freedom of speech and the free flow of information and attempts by government and other powerful corporate and other institutions to take control of the free flow of information. And one of the things that always astonishes me is the way people think they can be trusted with that power. I actually think that control over information is one of the two powers that should just not be given to any human. Torture and control of information, in my eyes, are things that no human should be trusted with. And it's actually why I think that the UN Convention Against Torture and America's First Amendment, I think, are monumental civilizational achievements, should be cherished because they're so improbable. And so when my attitude, and I know your attitude, if someone were to come to me, of course I have opinions about what is good speech and what is bad speech. Of course I do. Everybody does. But if someone came to me and said, Barry, I really like your opinions about what's good and bad information, and I want to give you the power to control information in line with your views, I would say, you're out of your mind. No one should be trusted with that. I certainly shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. But you know who most shouldn't be? The person who's like, I got this. Give it to me. Like, you're the worst. And those are the people who are most motivated to acquire and expand their power. So people come into government, and look, I don't want to make this, again, I try to be careful not to mention real personalities. It's not that I'm shy about doing it, as you know, when we have offline conversations. But I always want to be as persuasive as I can be. And if you mention real personalities or like this tribe or that tribe, it just lights up people's reptile brains, their amygdalas, and then they're not listening anymore. They just feel defensive, which I get. But I will say this. I've been doing a number of interviews for the new book, and a lot of people ask me, it's a common question, is Valeria Velez Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is she based on her? And the answer is no, none of my characters is a real person. There's even a disclaimer at the beginning of the book saying these are all fictional characters and products of my imagination. But many of my characters are the genesis of the inspiration for that character is something I've encountered in the real world. And I will say, having watched AOC from the beginning, and by the beginning I mean this, when she first ran in, was it 2018? I forget, the pandemic really screws things up. I think it was 2018, but maybe I'm off, maybe it was 2016. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I remember Glenn Greenwald, who's a terrific journalist who I follow, been following Glenn for, at this point, almost, I think, decades, close to it. Anyway, he interviewed her at the request of, or at the suggestion of Ryan Grimm, one of Glenn's colleagues. They were both then at The Intercept. Ryan's another guy, I gotta say it, who gave me a very kind blurb for the system. I'm really pleased and proud about that. Anyway, Ryan said, this is a really interesting character. She's out of nowhere. She's a bartender. Nobody's ever heard of her, and she's taken on Joe Crowley, the corporatist incumbent. She's smart, charismatic. You should talk to her. And Glenn interviewed her, and I watched the interview, and I was really impressed. She was articulate. I liked her values as she expressed them. Her adherence to what would be best for ordinary Americans, people in her district, as opposed to powerful centers, financial centers, the military industrial complex, all that sort of stuff. I was listening. I personally found her to be a breath of fresh air. And I really liked what she was saying. And as I've watched her progress through the corridors of power in the Democratic Party, what I see is someone who is making more and more compromises. And I think what she's going to find, if she continues to acquire more power, and she might, is that the system she's getting more influence within is going to inhibit her more and more from doing the things that long ago she thought she wanted to do, because that's the way it works as you wind your way through the system. So this is another thing, like, what have I learned, or has it changed my views or whatever? There are politicians I wish weren't politicians. And at the same time, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to what I think must have happened to them. They didn't start out this way, probably. And I'm going to make this true on both sides. Like recently, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, I don't know how it pronounces it.
Bongino, I think.
Bongino, okay.
Yeah.
These guys were, I found, pretty impressive when they were outside government, talking about the Epstein files and what might be in them, and we're going to release all that stuff, and it's up to the Americans to decide. I could go on and on about the Epstein case, and anybody who's curious about my fictional take, well, that would be my novel, The Chaos Kind. But leaving that aside, actually, if you're curious, here's a plug for a guy I really like, Daryl Cooper. He has a podcast called Martyr Made. And he's got I think it's a 5-part series on Epstein that is absolutely fascinating, and I recommend it to anyone who's curious about this. But it would be hard to argue that Jeffrey Epstein was not mixed up with Israeli intelligence. Pretty hard to argue that if you know a little bit about that story. And the U.S. government has files on all of that. It should release the files. Why not? They say, well, there's a national security implication. I'm like, what does that mean? Anyway, before they were in government, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were like, yeah, release the files. Kash Patel, it was like, day one you release those files. Like, it couldn't have been more clear, eloquent and vehement. And then a week or so ago, these guys gave a press conference. It sounded a little bit like a hostage video where they were like, we've seen the files. Nothing to see here. Absolutely, I'm convinced. There's no question he committed suicide. Nobody did it for him. And I'm like, what changed? You guys aren't even, like, maybe, but you're not even going to account for your position before versus your position now. So something seems to happen to people when they enter government. And I'm not saying this I'm not trying to beat up on anyone, AOC or Kash Patel or Dan Bongino or anyone. They're human. They're subject to a system, to human incentives and disincentives. Bad things happen to most people the more power they get. And that's just something I think all us ordinary people, citizens, subjects, whatever, should be clear-eyed about. These people are not your friends. They really aren't. They don't want what's best for you. They're playing a game where mostly you're a resource. I cannot recommend highly enough George Carlin's Life is Worth Losing HBO special from, I think it was 2006, but it doesn't matter. Just George Carlin, Life is Worth Losing, if you want to look it up. This is where he says, and it's like the truest, most foundational thing about power that I think I've ever heard. He's talking about politicians, and he's like, these people don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you. They don't care about you at all, at all, at all. He has to repeat it because people are like, what? Of course mommy and daddy love me. And it's like, they don't. They want to eat you. Mommy and daddy want to eat you. It's hard to get your head around, I know. But that's how mommy and daddy look at you. They're not your friends. They don't care about you. It's just very hard for people to accept that. And if you can't accept that unpleasant, I know, truth, then all your other perceptions about your society and the system you're living in and the way power is exercised in it, by whom and on behalf of whom, all that is going to be, as Blade put it, a sugar-coated topping. It's not the real world.
And it's true, and it applies across the board. A few years ago, I was talking again. It was about the war in Ukraine, and people don't get it. I'm Belgian. I'm not an American. I don't vote in the U.S. And so
It's okay. Most Americans don't either.
To a large degree, it doesn't really matter, who's president. I vote here in my country, and that's as fucked up as can be. So that's plenty for me. So I don't really have a team. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I don't have a team there, and I really don't know who I would choose if I would have to. They all suck, in my opinion. And I ended up saying to someone like, look, because I was talking about, okay, what does Russia want? What does Ukraine want? What does NATO countries want? What does the US want as the biggest financier of NATO? And I was talking about that stuff. Who the fuck cares what Russia wants? Yada yada yada. And I'm like, I was chastising the Biden administration because I think that their decisions when it came to the Ukraine war were horrible. And the person I was talking to was kind of coming at me and like, yeah, you're protecting Putin. I'm like, no. Let me put it differently. I live in a country that is tiny. We have no power. This is zero, zilch. Our army, it would be wiped out. We are wiped out in less than 24 hours. And so we are just the ping pong ball, the bouncing all over the place. We have nothing that we can do to anyone who comes attack us. We're too small. So I have no doubt in my mind that if Putin decided to bomb the shit out of my country or throw a nuke on our heads because NATO headquarters is here and me, my loved ones, my children, everybody dies instantly in a fiery ball of hell and chaos, that he would do that. But guess what? Biden would do the exact same thing if he thinks that that's what he needed to do to achieve his military goals. And so would Trump, and so would Obama have done, and so would Clinton have done, and whoever comes next would do the exact same thing to me and my loved ones. So you'll have to pardon me that I don't really care about my partisanship, because all of the American presidents don't give a rat's ass about me and mine. None, zero, at all.
That's exactly right. And, at least you're not even an American. So you're like, well, why would they? I'm Belgian. I'm like, but I'm American. They don't care about me either. I've said this many times, and it's a lot to get your head around. Rulers across countries they identify much more with each other than they do with the ruled in their own countries. They have more in common with each other than they do with the people they're ruling in their own countries. I think a good analogy would be royal families in Europe, like the Habsburgs and the Bourbons or whatever. They hated each other and they fought over the spoils of whatever system they were part of. But the one thing they agreed upon is, well, this is ours of right. I mean, we have these fights because we're at the table. That's how God intended it. And the peasants get the scraps, so we have to feed them something or they'd collapse and wouldn't be able to work our lands, and that wouldn't be good. But they're peasants. We all agree on that. And if there's any kind of an uprising, we'll put that shit down. That's how I look at the Democratic wing and the Republican wing and a lot of the ruling factions across the world, but the rest of it is just propaganda intended to divide and rule. By the way, it's funny because you're like, well, I'm Belgium and I don't vote, and I was like, wait a minute, Belgium is a free country, right? Yes. Well, America is the leader of the free world, right? Well, you should get to vote for the leader of the free world. Otherwise, he shouldn't be your leader. I mean, that's why we fought a revolution. No taxation without representation and whatnot. Stop calling yourself the leader of all these other people unless they're going to get a vote. They don't get to vote? Then you're not their leader. I know, I'm very literal. I've
got one more question for you.
Yeah.
I mean, people read the system. They love it and so on. Everybody reads different things in whatever an author writes. Right. That's inevitable, and that's kind of the point also. If there's a single takeaway that you would like the reader to get from the book, what would it be? Other than that it's an awesome book, had a great time reading it, excellent sex scenes. Just so everybody, I read an earlier draft of Barry's book months ago, so I get to say that. You guys have to wait for it to come out, which is June 6th, if I'm not mistaken.
June 6th.
So what's the takeaway?
So it's funny. I can't ever give simple 2-word answers, but it's this. My response is going to have. As I'm holding up my fingers, I'm like, yes, I did catch it in the shower door, this little finger right here. People ask me, they're like, are you painting one nail black? I'm like, I wish, because the pain was explosive. incandescent. But anyway, I would say three things. One is, yeah, it's funny. This book is a little different than what I've written before. And since you mentioned the sex scenes, I'll use this as a joke, but it's not really a joke. It's also seriously intended. I like to tell people this book has all the sex but less killing. So if you're expecting a John Rain book where there's a lot of killing, we don't have that much killing, but there is all the sex. Why is this? I think sex and violence are great in storytelling because they can be titillating in their own rights, and they should be. But they're also accelerants on character development, character relationships, character arcs, all that kind of stuff, as they are in real life. You know, when people say, like, Abraham knew Sarah, that's a wonderful euphemism because that is one way we really do get to know each other. So the book does have all that going for it. And what do I want people to take away from it? Second point would be, if I write a novel and you're not turning the pages because you're wildly entertained and you can't put it down, then I haven't done my job. It hasn't succeeded. I should have just written a blog post or a different story or something, because as Graham Greene put it, these are entertainments. They are intended to entertain you, to take you out of your own world for a little while and put you into a different world inside the minds and perspectives of other humans as closely as and realistically and compellingly as I can. So the book has to do these things, otherwise these entertainment things, or it just shouldn't have been born. It should have been born as something else. But if there's one thing I want people to take away from it, like on a deeper level, beyond just entertainment, I hope it will make people reconsider some assumptions, some implicit assumptions. I hope it'll make people think about things that they haven't really considered before. I don't provide any answers in the book. At least I don't intend to. I hope that if you read the book, you won't feel like, oh, I know Barry's a Democrat or he's a Republican or he's in favor of a big military or against it, or for or against a universal basic income or anything else. These things are all in play, or AI or nuclear weapons or a sixth-generation fighter jets he's for or against. I have different characters in the book who have different values, different priorities, different styles with regard to all these different elements. And none of them, I hope, is any kind of a straw man figure. They're all as fully realized three-dimensional human beings as I can create on the page, with compelling reasons for their values. And sometimes those values clash violently. I hope that when people are done reading the book, they'll talk about it, not just in the tell a friend way, although that wouldn't be the worst thing, but in the way that I hadn't thought of it that way, and you have one opinion, or you took one viewpoint from the book and your friend or some family member, whoever, took another, and then you talk about it. And this is more like a final hope, a coda to wrap the whole thing up. For anyone who reads the book and feels finds it thought-provoking, and you wind up having a conversation with someone you know, or just in an online forum or any place that's provoked by the book, I hope it'll be a civil and productive conversation where you really listen to each other instead of demonizing people and not listening and saying you're wrong and all that kind of stuff and I'm right, because there's really quite a bit too much of that in the world right now. And I think we could all do with a little bit more, even a lot more listening and fewer accusations. That's something I would, if my entertainment, the system, could foster a bit more of that, I'd feel great about that outcome.
All right, awesome. Now, before we get to the second part with the Q&A with my patrons, I have to ask this one. So what's next? Next book coming out and so on, because people get upset if I don't ask that one.
Okay. I'm at a little bit of a fork in the road, and if the road and these are both great, it's one of those things where you're going to have to choose vanilla or chocolate ice cream. Can I have both? And it's like, nope. So if the fork goes one way, then my next book project will be another John Rain prequel. I did a little online survey, and I'm so grateful for the responses I get. People make such good cases. I'm like, I'm thinking about doing X or Y. In this case, I did a survey. I know you know this one because you had a thought about this too. One would be a book set in present day where Rain gets involved with his son, who's now, is probably about 19 years old or something like that, in some kind of trouble that only his old man can help with, and as only John Rain can help. And it would bring in some of the characters from the other universes who cross over in the Detachment and the Killer Collective and the Chaos Con. And that would really be a fun book. And then the other possibility is this. I've written 2 Rain prequels. The first book I wrote was called Rainfall at the time. Now it's called A Clean Kill in Tokyo, set in Tokyo in 2002 when the book was published. And then I went back in time eventually and wrote a book called The Graveyard of Memories that's also set in Tokyo, but in 1972. Where Rain is, I think he's 20 years old. He's fresh out of the war in Vietnam. And for me, it's a beautiful love story, but also with a lot of killing. I like to say I write romances, but with a lot of killing. And Graveyard of Memories is probably the exemplar of that mix. And then there was another prequel. And Graveyard of Memories was the story of how Rain went from CIA bagman and fall guy to fledgling assassin. And then Zero Sum tells the story of how the fledgling assassin became the master. And I have this idea for a third prequel set in 1992. So we seem to be doing decade-long intervals. 72, 82, 92 is the one I'm thinking about now. And then the first book got published in 2002, so that's more present day. 92 would be set in Japan, but not Tokyo, out of Japan. If anybody here is a Trevanian fan, if you've ever read The Summer of Katya, which is a beautiful book, it's such a great thriller and mystery and love story, it would be in some ways reminiscent of The Summer of Katya. Rain's out of his element, in a new environment, in a romance. There's going to be a lot of killing, and overall I see this as a last chance for Rain to escape the wheel of fate. Right? So I really like this idea, and I did an online poll, and it was almost paralyzing because people made such good cases for each. But in the end, for reasons I probably can't logically articulate, I found myself gravitating toward the prequel. That doesn't mean I won't write the one with his son Koichiro. It just means that the prequel would come first. So that's one path. And then the other one, which I can't really get into that much right now, but hopefully I'll be able to soon, would have to do with some television writing. And that might not happen. It's always a long shot. The good thing about the books is nobody can tell me to write them or not write them. If I want to write a book, I'm going to write a book. That's why I've written 19 of them and 4 short stories too. I can write screenplays and features, and I have written a bunch, and I've sold them, but they haven't gotten made, not yet. But for this one, I would have to be commissioned to do it. And that might happen. But if it doesn't happen, I'll write the book. If it does happen, I'm going to have to devote a lot of my energies to making that happen. And I'm sorry for being a little mysterious. I usually am overly transparent. At least that's what my agent tells me. But in this case, I think saying less is probably the way to go.
Probably. And I'm going to tease everybody because I know.
I hope I'll be able to tell everyone soon. And if it doesn't happen, then I'll tell you what didn't happen. But not yet.
Oh, I'm crossing my fingers, so you know.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring us to the second part, so I will put a link to the website in the show notes, a link to the Amazon page. People can pre-order the book right now. It's going to be available, ebook, paper, audiobook, all that kind of jazz.
Who narrated it? Who narrated the audiobook?
One of the best narrators around, I think. He kind of looks like you.
Poor bastard.
No, it's good. And folks, just so you know, Barry's an excellent narrator. You won awards for that, right?
Multiple.
Right?
I'm sorry for anyone who doesn't know me. I'm sorry to be so goofy about it. It's absurd how much I enjoy narrating the books. I must be a frustrated actor or something. I do get a lot of great feedback. People really do seem to enjoy the narration I do, and it's absurdly flattering to me when people are like, I feel like most authors shouldn't read their books, but you were so great. I'm like,
all right. So I'm going to continue talking with Barry. We're going to hop on over to the Patreon. The podcast is supported by the generosity of my patrons for many years now. This is what makes it all possible. So if you want to support the podcast and hear all the answers that Barry's going to give to some really fun questions as well, hop on over. It's a monthly subscription. It starts at $3 a month, and goes up a little bit depending on all the perks that you want to have. This is my 7th year of doing Patreon, so that there's over 1,000 entries, hundreds of hours of video, tons of bonus episodes with my guests. So there's a lot of stuff there. And as soon as you become a member, you get immediate access. That was my
when you
sales
get
pitch.
immediate access for as low as $3 a month to the entire archive of thousands of dollars of entertaining and informative information.
Right.
That sounds like a tremendous value.
I
know
so.
It is, because I'm a Patreon. I'm one of your patrons too.
See, so everybody, you just hop on over. Okay, I'm gonna call it. Okay, thanks everybody for listening. Talk to you next time.